Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Southern California Water Coalition's What Matters webinar series. Today, we've got a very special program for you on water quality matters, understanding and addressing PFAS in our water. I want to say thank you first before we get kicked off today to all of our panelists who I'll introduce in just a minute. But specifically, I also want to make sure I say thank you to our sponsors who have made today possible. Our webinar sponsors today are Jacobs, SL Environmental Law Group, Tetra Tech, Aqueous Vets, Black & Beach, Calgon Carbon, CDM Smith, HDR, Pacific Hydrotech, and Stantec. I also like to make sure we say thank you to our founding sponsors. These are the folks that sponsor us throughout the course of the year. Our friends at the Irvine Ranch Water District, Metropolitan Water District of Southern California, Riverside County Flood Control, the Water Replenishment District, Inland Empire Utilities Agency, Los Angeles Department of Water and Power, Los Angeles County Public Works, San Bernardino County, and West Basin Municipal Water District. So today we actually have a really interesting combination of story to tell and the issue of emerging contaminants, and specifically about the some 4,000 plus chemical compounds that are found, or what we refer to as PFAS. But before I introduce our speakers, just because I want them to understand what our audience knows about this issue, we have a poll that I wanted to put up for you very first out, because I want to get an assessment from our audience. And what I'd like you to do is to answer this question for me, and we'll show the results here in just a minute. How familiar are all of you with PFAS? Your options are PFAS. Well, I know it's a four-letter word and has the letter F in it. I'm not sure if that's good or bad. I'm pretty familiar with it, and I'm pretty concerned. I'm pretty familiar, but I'm not terribly concerned because there's a good plan to address it. Or I've just published my peer-reviewed dissertation on PFAS contamination, and I know everything there is to know. So I'll give you just a second before we launch on that. And I see results coming in. All right, I'm gonna be a good political pollster at this point and say it's pretty overwhelming that I'm rather familiar with it, but I'm kind of concerned. So panelists know, they know a little bit, but you guys are gonna help us define what the issue is and what's going on and how we deal with it. And to help us do that this morning, I wanna welcome as well our panel, very distinguished panel, and we're going to go through some things that'll be kind of like speed dating, but I want to welcome Robert Beste, who's the Assistant General Manager at the Water Replenishment District of Southern California, Steve Carmona, who's the City Manager, the City of Pico, Rivera in Southern California, Jason Dadakis, he's the Executive Director of the Water Quality and Technical Resources for the Orange County Water District, Scott Grieco, PhD, at the Global Technology Leader with Jacobs, Craig Miller, our General Manager with the Western Municipal Water District, Dan Newton, California State Water Resource Control Board, the Division of Drinking Water Standards, and Steve Tedesco, Senior Vice President with Tetra Tech. Gentlemen, thank you all for being with us, and thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules to help us understand about this issue of PFAS. As we start today's program, I want to start with Steve Tedesco. So Steve, I know you and your team at Tetra Tech have helped a lot of local agencies deal with their PFAS issues. As you can see from our survey question, we have a diverse audience that are waiting today. There are some of our audience that they know a lot about PFAS, some know a little like me. I was the one who put the question in there about, to me, it's kind of a four-letter word because people just mostly like to curse at it. So to get us started, can you give us a background on PFAS, provide some framing for the rest of the discussion we're going to have today, given the knowledge level of the audience?
Well, great. Well, thanks, Charlie. So PFAS is not really a four-letter word. It's actually an acronym for a group or a class of over 4,000 chemicals. So PFAS is found in many everyday products that we use, including Teflon, Gore-Tex, Scotchgard, Blue Ice. It's in a lot of food wrappers, especially fast food wrappers, Post-it notes, in your shampoo and in your sunscreen. It's also used as a firefighting foam. They call it the forever chemicals because they don't degrade and they don't break up in the environment. There's evidence that exposure to PFAS can lead to adverse health in humans, including high cholesterol, low infant birth weights, immune system disorders, some cancers, and some thyroid problems. So PFAS is also found in our groundwater throughout California, throughout the nation, and especially here in Southern California. In California, it's been detected in over 660 wells in 209 systems in 36 counties here. But the news isn't really all bad. Today, we have a great group of people from regulators, from agencies, from water districts, from cities, and from private companies. They're all currently working together to solve this PFAS problem. We've already seen a couple of agencies in Southern California, like Santa Clarita, who've already have their systems up and running to serve their wells. I've been very lucky to be part of the Orange County Water District program, and we've actually are designing 4 of their projects right now. 3 of them are actually in going into construction or in early phases of construction. Some of them beyond up online before the end of the year. And I really hope that Jason Dadakis and Scott Greco could talk some more about that program. It's actually a fantastic program that's been running for over a year now. And they've really done a great job of doing both research, pilot testing, design, and construction all at the same time. So we also have a number of other people who are going to be addressing the public issues, the public perception, and what's going on in their cities, like Steve Carmona from Pico, Rivera, and Craig Miller from Western Municipal Water District. And Rob Beste will talk about the WRD program, which she's actually heading up right now to serve the agencies in the WRD service area. So with that, that kind of gives you an overview, and I know you're going to have some great questions from Dan Newton from the State Water Resources Control Board Division of Drinking Water. We've been working very closely with their staff, and they've actually been doing a fantastic job of approving and regulating and getting our projects out and ready for construction.
Well, thanks for that, Dan, or Steve. Dan, it does kind of turn to you. And anytime somebody talks about contaminants in water, it can be a scary thing. But I'd like to build on what Steve just highlighted. Right now, as I understand it, California doesn't currently have any, call it legally binding regulatory limit or a maximum contaminant level for PFAS, but the state does have response levels and notification levels. What's the difference between response, notification, and a maximum contaminant level? I also kind of wanted just to weave in, because Steve noted there are thousands of these compounds that make up the family of PFAS. But right now, as I understand it, the state they've only begun to regulate a small number, or a handful of them. Is this kind of one of those whack-a-mole things? You kind of take them one off, or is this, how are you at the state addressing this so that the public is comfortable with their water supply?
Thank you, Charlie. A great question and a great introduction by Steve. Yeah, it's a pleasure to be on the panel. And yes, the effort so far has been very cooperative, and we're getting in front of this thing as fast as we can. To answer your question, the first part of the question, notification levels, response levels, those are advisory levels. Those are our first step in moving forward to understanding the prevalence, occurrence, and toxicity of a chemical. The notification level, to boil it down in essence, is a level at which DDW recommends that the governing agency, or the water system, notify its governing body, I should say, that this analyte or chemical or contaminant is in the water. In other words, it's a heads up. Again, it's an advisory level and a recommendation. The response level is a higher threshold yet, a higher level of the concentration, in which DDW recommends that the water system notify its public, a right to know, in essence. That's what we have right now for PFAS and PFOA. We have 2 of those analytes with response levels and notification levels. Now, again, those are advisories. Then as we move into the regulatory process, we start our public process, and we work on the regulatory level, which is an MCL. And of course, that takes into a consideration affordability and feasibility. And those MCL levels could be different than what we see with our NL or our RLs. That is the public process, and that's when we move into the regulatory arena once we have the MCL. So to back up, we're still in the discovery process, so to speak. We have the NLs and RLs for PFAS and PFOA. That's PFOS and PFOA. We will soon have a notification level and response level for PFBS. We're going to be discussing that at our March 2nd board meeting here soon. And we've got other analytes moving forward that we'll be asking for. So yes, it's a as you mentioned, Charlie, it's a whack-a-mole process. It is not our intent to have an MCL for every analyte out there in PFAS. We're certainly interested in exploring with high hopes that we can move into a classification or a grouping system on this particular PFAS problem. PFAS being the general term for all of the 4,000 of analytes in this constituent. So we're in the middle process, and to give you a bit of a tone on that, over the history, DDW has issued about 90 NLs and RLs for about 90 analytes. About half of those moved to an MCL. We're pretty confident that, of course, PFAS and PFOA will move to an MCL, and we're going to start that process as soon as we receive our public health goals from our Office of Environmental Health and Hazard Assessment. They're still working on reviewing literature to make a recommendation for a public, to issue a public health goal, which we will then take and move forward through the public process to obtain an MCL. And did I answer all your questions there, Charlie? There was a multiple.
No, I like to ask those multiple, questions, just kind of see what comes from it. But we'll come back in just a second, because I do want to then bring into the conversation Steve Carmona and Craig Miller, both of whom, obviously Steve with the administration of a city and what that means to his city, and Craig as a retail agency. It's one thing, guys, that you have a concern that is raised. And then you've got the state looking into it. You've got, sort of influx as to learning about what this is and then being able to come up with sound regulatory policy. But you guys are on the front lines having to serve constituents, having to serve customers. What is your experience in serving retail customers? Are they concerned? Do they know what's happening? Is this an issue that resonates, Steve, in your case, up to your city council? Is this something people are concerned about? And how do you address that with them? And then I want to shift over to Craig as a water agency and similar kind of question.
Definitely, thank you. Yes, our residents are very concerned about this issue. Early on, we had got some press coverage when the NLs and RLs came into play, and it wasn't very positive press per se. In our opinion, it was a little unfair. It did talk about our water as being tainted. And so that created a lot of discussion around our community, in our city council as well. And our city council actually is taking some bold measures right now. It's definitely at the top of the priority. Our residents basically want to know, is our city's water safe to drink? And so we are moving forward and trying to address those issues. The city council, as I mentioned before, has made this a top priority. We're starting by the design of treatment facilities, and we're also currently in the process of procuring vessels for 3 of our water plants and 1 well site. In addition to that, we started our rapid small-scale column testing to identify what best treatment would be for our groundwater. So again, just to surmise, this is one of our top priorities in our community.
Greg, how about your experience out in Riverside?
Yeah, thanks, Charlie. We have a lot of guests from all over the place, so maybe I'll give a little context as to our agency. Western Municipal Water District is a little bit unique in that we are both a wholesaler and a retailer. So we're, if anyone's going to import water into Western Riverside County, they import it through Western. That usually comes from actually Northern California, so that water's coming from 500 miles away. And we wholesale to about 8 different entities, cities and water districts, but then we also have retail customers. So our service area has about 1 million residents. So not the biggest water district in the world, but certainly not the smallest. But remember the good old days when you learned as an engineer, just solve a problem, don't tell anyone about it till you have an answer. Those days are gone. We're much more sophisticated in our outreach programs now. And so, we, in my early part of my career, we wouldn't have even mentioned this until there was an MCL and we had to really take action. But, for Western and our retail customers, really a couple of years ago, we started our outreach campaign to talk about PFAS. And, there was, a couple of movies coming out. What was it? Dark Waters and the Devil You Know. And so we thought, well, we better get out in front of this before it starts hitting the news media. So we actually started what we call Water 411 meetings with our customers. So we'd go out into the community and bring people together. And this was always on our list of things to talk about. But, unlike Steve, we would ask people to raise hands if you've heard of it. And, a couple of years ago, we'd get one or two people. And so no one had really heard anything about it. And, our outreach was really based on telling the community that, this is what you're getting with our water district is we're out in front of this, we're doing the research, we're going to make sure that we're providing safe drinking water for everybody. We're going to track it. We're going to figure out what the regulations are. We're going to treat for it if we have to. But first we have to figure out, what are the health effects and what are the regulators going to do with it? So I think to this day, we still are not getting a huge response from our customers. We keep talking about it, but it really is just kind of flying under the radar screen. I don't know if that's a commentary that, they trust us, or if it's just a commentary that nothing bad has happened. And, for Western, we're very fortunate in our water supply. We have 2 groundwater desalters that were already in place to treat for salts and nitrates. So they're also treating for PFAS. And then our imported supply is coming through the metropolitan water system, and they're non-detect for PFAS. So I think probably the fact that, no one's getting it in the system, they're probably not paying as close attention as other entities are. And so you'll hear from other panelists where, it's a hot and present danger and high on their radar screen. But for us, our customers, they're informed, we're trying to inform, but I think like most customers, until it's an imminent problem, it's not really on their radar screen.
No, thanks, Greg. How about others? Anybody else kind of want to get in on the conversation of this and just what you're hearing as an experience with either customers that you've had or other constituencies? Is this an issue I can see where, just because of the political climate that we're in, if somebody got a hold of something like this, it could certainly be an issue in an election cycle and try to get some folks sort of hyped up about it. At the same time, as an institution, you're trying to do the best you can for your consumers. Does anybody see this as a major issue in Southern California, or is this lessons that we take from other parts of the country or other parts of the world?
Charlie, this is Jason. Just one comment. I would say that for in our public outreach and interaction with the public, for as many people who have questions about water quality and health effects, and we do our best to address those. I've been surprised by the number of folks who have questions or even skepticism about the need to treat for this, and the need for the associated increasing costs and rates to go with it, and having to try to do your best to walk those folks through kind of the underlying rationale, and referencing some of the information that Dan and his colleagues at the state can provide us and tools for that. I guess that's just been one surprise I've had, is just the volume of that in certain constituencies can be equal, if not greater, than the folks who have concerns about their water quality.
Okay, so it kind of really cuts both ways. Let me bring Scott into this conversation then, because I think it's a natural place for it. That while California is, as Dan indicated, you're looking at finalizing its MCL, there are other states like Massachusetts, New York, New Jersey. They all have regulatory limits in place. I understand Michigan just passed new regulations, and that Virginia has regulations that are about to go into effect next year. What observations can you share from other states with regulations that are in place, and how Southern California's response is either similar, different, or, are there lessons that we should be taking in California from other places that have already addressed this issue?
Sure. Thanks, Charlie. I appreciate being able to participate today. Yeah, I would say, if you really take a step back to answer that question, like looking at the history, 4 or 5 years ago, when the federal level lifetime health advisory lowered to the current 70, that did present some concern. And I know I was involved with a couple of projects back then just having to do with that. But what I would generally say is, you fast forward to today, and obviously it's a state-driven issue. There's almost half the states that have their own guidance values or proposed or final regulations now. I would actually say, looking at it historically, California kind of gained, compared to the Northeast, especially, California came to the game a little bit late, in terms of looking at it. But what I'd say where California is at now is probably very similar to all the other states. When you look at PFOA and PFOS, the notification level is right in the same area of magnitude, in terms of the numerical values that have been established in a lot of other states for those compounds. And I'd also say that California is, being very proactive. Like you mentioned, Michigan, I believe it's 7 or 8 compounds that they have on their list. Places like Massachusetts and Vermont have 6 compounds. So California is definitely, as Dan mentioned, moving in that direction with PFBS and other compounds that are slated to be reviewed for notification and response levels. What I'd also say is that, in today's climate, I think we're all aware that although there's specific regulatory teeth, if you will, or requirements that come with a promulgated regulation like an MCL. We in California, as well as every other state, whether it's an actual past regulation or whether it's a guidance value, the water industry is taking this very seriously and very proactively, and treating when there isn't an actual requirement from a legal standpoint. So that's certainly a trend that we're clearly seeing in California, and we're seeing in every other state that may not even have an MCL yet. The last thing I'd mention is that, it's interesting that you bring Virginia into the mix as part of that question, because, Virginia doesn't have a state regulation yet. And I would say that, there's a number of states in the South, Midwest and lower Midwest, in Virginia included in the lower Mid-Atlantic, that don't have state regulations. And we don't see a lot of activity in those states, but Virginia in and of itself has, convened passed a couple of bills on the legislation to convene a workshop to provide state recommendations by the end of this year, and look to recommend MCLs for the end of, to the end of next year. So I think Virginia is a good example where, it's a state that's moving forward, in all the states that we don't see action right now could be moving forward at a state level. And, just so everybody's kind of moving at their own pace. But there's certainly a number of states like California that, have been out ahead, and certainly everything that's being done right now is being driven for, treatment and investigation, and activity is really being driven from the state level.
Thanks. And anybody else want to chime in on this? Because it does trigger a question. I'm going to come back to Dan very quickly on this, because it just reminds me too much of an adage that a former state legislator that I had the privilege of working with used to say, for better or for worse, it happens in California first. And are there lessons from other states that you're taking into consideration, or is the state really kind of looking at this potential for an MCL as kind of unique and special, and trying to leading again the rest of the country?
Yes, Charlie, the state, so we're in an investigation mode. As mentioned, several states move very quickly with a regulatory level through statute. We're investigating. We're trying to understand the occurrence, the prevalence. What do we see in California? Fortunately, we don't have manufacturing of PFAS in California, but we use a lot of secondary manufacturing and development of other products that require PFAS. And so we're trying to understand what analytes are we seeing based on the handful that we can test for, the 18. Where's it located? Now keep in mind that we're doing this in a parallel effort with our sister division, the Division of Water Quality, who's testing the groundwater and soils. So we're doing a coupled approach in which we check source wells adjacent to high risk or high vulnerable areas that have been known to use PFAS. So we're in the middle of that investigation and we're learning a lot. The idea is to try to fingerprint certain uses of PFAS, understand their health impacts, their prevalence. Frankly, PFBS that we have an NL coming out for, we have yet to have a test that would exceed what we're recommending for an RL. And so knowing this kind of information, I believe, produces better regulation in the long run. Working with our partners like Orange County Water District and others to understand what treatments are effective and available and moving forward in a very strategic fashion, yet being protective of public health. I think California is doing a very, again, as I said, strategic approach, and we're in the middle of the pack. As mentioned by Scott, our numbers are relatively in the middle of the pack from what we've seen statewide, or pardon me, nationwide.
Thanks, Dan. Let me bring Jason and Rob into the conversation, because you gentlemen both have institutions that are responsible for overseeing large groundwater basins with really diverse groups of pumpers and those who then take your water. How have you been able to work with your local retail agencies and they're affected by PFAS? I'm going to start, Jason, do you want to kind of share a little bit? When we put this panel together, I have to admit, when they asked me about PFAS, I knew it as the 4-letter word, and I thought, Orange County, they've been at this forever. They're leaders in the industry, and then I had to be reminded, it's only been about 18 months, so it's still pretty darn new. But from your learning experience, what's Orange County been like?
Sure, thanks, Charlie. So yeah, in our role as the groundwater basin manager in our service area in North and Central Orange County for a population of about 2.5 million people, we've acted aggressively, I think, in a number of ways on this issue. Initially, to help wrap our arms around the extent of the issue in our basin, our laboratory brought back the drinking water analytical method for PFAS that we originally used during the UCMR3 program, so we could analyze samples from our basin-wide monitoring network. And then this testing capability has also been used to allow our retail agencies to fulfill the monitoring orders they receive from Dan and his colleagues at the state. And so as we realize that now 11 of our 19 major retailers had one or more of their wells impacted by PFAS, including some having nearly all of their wells impacted, our elected board of directors started thinking about a policy to help out with this, and ultimately developed and established a policy where Orange County Water District, as the basin manager, is going to cover 100% of the capital costs for the wellhead treatment facilities, for the ownership of those facilities to then be passed to the retailer once they're constructed, and then for the future O&M to be shared 50-50 between the district and the retailer. And then so flowing from that policy, we conducted basin-wide planning, implementation studies, pilot studies on treatment, as well as individual engineering design and construction efforts for the affected retailers. That's leading to construction contracts and projects being implemented today and hoping to come online this year, as Steve mentioned earlier. And just with the overarching goal of really trying to restore our local groundwater supply as soon as possible.
So Rob, WRD, you guys are like the go-to in Los Angeles County for groundwater. What's your experience?
Yeah, thanks, Charlie. Yeah, we're somewhat similar to Jason. As a replenishment district, we oversee a basin that has 4.2 million people and a very diverse group of pumpers, as you've said. We have some very small mutuals to the LADWPs and the Long Beaches, large pumpers. So we have a variety of abilities within our area for the pumpers to deal with this type of thing. So the first thing we did we actually formed a working group. And this working group has met regularly, back when you could meet actually in person, but now it's gone virtually, but really to provide information about what we know, what the latest information is coming out with regards to PFAS and PFOA, and to allow it as a database for all of our pumpers in our region. Our sampling orders came out in 2019, 2020. So our pumpers are still in that process now. We have orders out, I think it was like 97 wells or so that are being looked at right now. And we looked at it also, we have a whole series of nested monitoring wells throughout our entire area. So we know where it's located within our basin right now. But what our board really wanted to do, similar to Orange County, is we really wanted to provide a funding mechanism for the pumpers in our area. And our board really was very active in asking for us to put together a program that allows for funding and helping out these various pumpers that are affected. And the way our rate structure work is we collect a replenishment assessment that everybody pays. And so we really had to go to our boards. We actually have a budget advisory committee and a technical advisory committee made up of pumpers. And we really went to them and said, hey, here's what we think we should provide funding for. And they came back and said, yes, there's a certain amount of funding that we're comfortable with at this time. So right now, we're providing funding in the first round. We have about 13 applications in for our program, about $34 million within the first tranche here. And we're really in the application process right now. We're finding that, like I said, there's a variety of abilities. We have a program where we can just provide you just straight funding, or we can provide complete technical assistance. So we're still in that process right now and finding out how much help the various pumpers want. So we'll see in the next year or so how this comes down, but this is kind of where we're at right now. And, as a overseeing agency, once again, yeah, we don't have the retail customers, but we certainly want to help out those customers as much as possible.
Appreciate that. So anybody have any other experience, or is this, in the work you do with other water providers, groundwater purveyors, is this pretty consistent in terms of what others have seen and what they're taking a look at? That's just kind of to anybody on the panel if you want to throw yourselves into the mix.
I'll weigh in a little bit while others who are smarter than me are thinking about answers. But I think what's interesting, Charlie, since we're talking to a broader group than Southern California here, so we get caught in our bubble of Southern California water, and I think it's really unique that there are entities like Water Replenishment District and Orange County Water District, and that you have these regional groundwater managers that have a role to play in water quality to assist the retail agencies that are serving customers. You go to other parts of the state and other parts of the country, that's not necessarily the case. So, they're kind of like Big Brother, being able to swoop in with a funding source. And as you can see at Orange County, with the technical expertise that they can really tackle a huge issue like this, not just from the water quality standpoint, but from the regulatory standpoint, legal standpoint, the research standpoint. So, I guess we take it for granted that you have big regional entities that have the horsepower and the funding to help out on issues like this. Other parts of the state, other parts of the country aren't that fortunate. So I think that's a big part of the dilemma is, and I think we're going to talk about this a little bit later in the funding, but without that umbrella above the retailers, that it leaves a lot of people in a tough situation. Where do they get the money to do wellhead treatment or groundwater remediation? They just don't have the horsepower to do that. So, sometimes we take it for granted here, and we talk in these conferences and we're talking to people that don't have that. I think they're kind of like holding their hands up like, well, what are we supposed to do? We don't have that.
Yeah, well, it reminds me of one of those other adages I'd always learned. You know, California is really big and really diverse. That's the good news. And bad news, California is really big and really diverse. And so, there's no single one-stop shop. You can't just plug and play these things.
Right, but I think, and we'll get to this later. I want to steal the thunder from later, but it's investment. It's investment, and people have to be willing to make the investment. So we invest in Metropolitan. The Orange County residents are investing in Orange County Water District. LA County is also investing in Replenishment District. So it's that investment that has to be made in preparation for things like this. But we'll get to that later. Maybe that's a precursor.
So any other comments on this particular item before I sort of move to the next, because it's sort of a natural breaking point. And I'm going to just suggest to the audience that if you do have questions, and we have a number of them that are coming in, and I am seeing them, and I'm just going to place them in the order of our conversation. So please feel free to type those into your Q&A chat box. I'm happy to take those. But as a natural break, because we're going to move to our next survey question. So I kind of want to get a feel from the audience here. And the question is, who do you think is responsible for treating and remediating PFAS? And your choices, it's local cities and municipalities, because they're responsible for delivering safe water. 2, the polluters, because they're responsible for this ending up in our water supply. C, manufacturers. The manufacturers responsible for making this stuff in the first place. They should be held responsible for payment. Or D, the state. They're responsible for making drinking water regulations. Just kind of curious to get a feel for where people think, as we start talking about treating and remediating, where should that responsibility lie? And I see we get a much more diverse set of responses in our first question. So let's just give it a minute. Wow, I'm seeing the numbers jump all over here. All right. So our results, it looks like by a small margin, 48%, almost half, think that the manufacturers should be responsible for making for the treatment and remediation. But that's followed very closely by those that then use the product and are deemed, quote, the polluters. And then not very far, actually not very far, Steve Carmona, not very far behind there are the local cities and municipalities. They still think you're responsible by a third. And then the last, Dan Newton, you may be able to run across the street to the Capitol and be able to let them know that only 19% think the state ought to be responsible for this. That's an unusual result. So, all right, so let's move on then. I'm going to move now to Steve Tedesco. And after sort of listening to all of our previous panelists, it's really clear that we need to optimize science, engineering, and the construction of these treatment facilities for PFAS. I know you've seen a lot of them. What are the scientists, the engineers, the contractors, the suppliers? What are they all doing to help lower costs and minimizing impacts then to ratepayers? Because at the end of the day, it's going to be, you can treat for most anything. What's it going to end up costing the folks? And how do you see that working?
Oh, great question, Charlie. So on the scientific end, we're really seeing a lot of work being done on different types of treatment technologies that can treat PFAS less expensive than what we're treating it for now. We're seeing lots of different investigations and studies on different types of media. And Orange County is doing some great testing on some novel absorbents in their pilot testing that they're doing right now. Some of them are showing very, very good results that can be used in the future in there. So all of those are good. There's some in situ treatment technologies that are also being investigated. None so far have shown enough promise to be used. From the engineering and construction end, some of the things that we've learned, some lessons we've learned so far, is the first one is that every one of these well sites are different. Okay, it's really important that you look at it from an individual standpoint at each individual well. when you look at the treatment technologies, a lot of them look like they're all cookie cutter and you just slap them on the site, but that's really not true. It really depends on what that individual site is. The feed water to the plant is extremely important. We're finding out that other chemicals besides the PFAS itself will affect how long the media lasts. So it's very, very important to understand that. Bench testing and pilot testing are important. When you lay out your design, you always have to make sure that you watch out for that future regulation that may be coming up in there. So if you're treating for PFAS, but you know you have 1,4-dioxane or something like that in there, make sure you save room for that on your site. So consider those future regulations in your design. There's a lot of work that we do to figure out what the best technology is, what's the most cost effective. But a lot of times it depends on the site requirements. So a lot of times, whether you go with a GAC plant or an IX plant is totally dependent on how big your site is. We're seeing a lot of sites that are just too small to put, you know, the larger size facilities that GAC plants will sometimes take. And then finally, you got to remember that a lot of these sites are older well sites that need significant upgrades, okay? So when you drop this treatment plant in there, you're going to have additional head loss. You got to make sure your pumps and your motors are adequate. Sometimes they have to be upsized. Sometimes your electrical equipment needs to be upsized, and sometimes your instrumentation and control facilities need to be upsized to fit this treatment plant into a standard well site. And then from an overall construction standpoint, these jobs are pretty easy to get started, okay? But always the longest lead item on them is to purchase the vessels, okay? So if you pre-purchase some of the vessels ahead of time, once you award the contract could pretty much be breaking ground like within a couple of weeks of getting the notice to proceed. So on our first project, the contractor was out there digging and over excavating and recompacting the foundation and getting ready to set his forms for concrete, like within about 3 weeks from notice to proceed. So any kind of pre-purchase that you can do can really shorten your construction schedule and significantly drop your costs.
Thanks, Steve. And I apologize. I sort of jumped ahead a little bit just because it was a natural place to go on some of the treatment. But Dan, I want to come back to you for a minute with that poll we gave on who the audience thinks should be responsible. I mean, obviously, you know, as we sort of set up when we began, the state is who everybody sort of looks to ultimately for what is the regulation, what's it going to require, and then all of the water purveyors, you know, they'll sort of meet it with the technologies that Steve just kind of described and how we go about it. I'm sort of wondering, how is the state approaching, or how do you like to generally approach these complexities? 'Cause when we started these things you described earlier in the conversation, PFAS is sort of the new contamination that people want to talk about, but we've been through this before. In the 90s, we had the MTBE, we've had, you know, with underground tanks. I mean, this is not, you know, water quality obviously is not new, or there would be no need for drinking water standards. How do you at the state go about, or what is your approach to these complexities and that whack-a-mole thing we talked about a little bit earlier?
Yeah, that's a good question, Charlie. And the bottom line is we're playing catch up. It's with all these new developments and new technologies, there's ever increasing threats to our groundwater. It's just growing every day. Along with that is our knowledge of those threats. And so, yeah, it's going to be typical practice in that we learn more and we find more threats to our groundwater. I don't think that's a cycle that will frankly ever end. I'd be hopeful it will, but I think that'd be a little bit naive to think that. So as we move forward, we're trying to utilize existing programs, use our existing processes to address this and learn more. As you know, the UST program was very successful in eliminating about 15,000 sites down to about 1,000. Of course, there was a funding source there, and I think that's the real key here, is finding a funding source to address these issues. But that's, I think, what you're heading towards here in a bit. However, right now, what we're trying to do is learn more, use existing policies where we can see fit to adjust and address for PFAS. Look at developing tools for our regional boards and for our district offices, our drinking offices, to assist with understanding vulnerabilities and hotspots. And then lastly, working as a team as we are here. This panel is absolutely fabulous in the proactive mode they're taking, and what we're learning will apply statewide for those pieces of California that are very much different. Up north here, we don't have quite the sophistication in certain groundwater aspects, and we'll take what we learned down south and apply those tools up north. So it's very much we're in this all together, and we're developing tools to help us out. I think the payment side of the question is the key component.
So what I'm hearing, Dan, just as a follow-up, is that that there is no real silver bullet here. I mean, and there may be in some folks' minds when any new contaminant's identified, just sort of wave the magic wand, make it standard, just everybody meet that standard. But I'm hearing it's really very specific, and so that you're meeting the right need in the right way in the right timing, so that we're not just throwing regulations at a dartboard and saying, okay, that one feels good today, let's move on.
Well put. Yes. In fact, the water quality plays significantly into the duration and operations and maintenance of these treatment facilities for PFAS and PFOA. Different water quality coming in, the effluent or influent changes the contact time and what we're seeing as far as release or breakthrough or leakage. However, Orange County is doing a fabulous job with their pilot study. We're learning a lot, and we're staying in tune and anxious to see what the results look like. But I did see a question in the panel, and or on the Q&A, and I thought I'd throw it out there that right now it appears that the treatment of preference at this point in time is, of course, GAC and ion exchange, granulated activated carbon and ion exchange. And it was also mentioned that the novel media is effective. So I thought I'd throw that out there since I saw that question.
Okay, appreciate that. So Rob and Jason, let me bring you back in the conversation, because I want to play a bit more with this audience survey. Fortunately, contamination wasn't, as we determined, it's not something you created. It's not something water utilities caused. But unfortunately, because we are the ones that then produce it and deliver it to customers, your utilities have varying levels of responsibility for managing that local groundwater basin, and then by proxy of that, helping to ensure that the water supply is safe. Are there strategies that you're advancing specifically to reduce the impacts of groundwater contamination into the future? So it's one thing to pull it out of the ground and treat it. Is there something that you're doing or looking at that would help prevent or reduce contamination in the future?
Yeah, Charlie, this is Rob. I'll go first here, maybe on this one, since Jason got to last time. But yeah, no, it's interesting. We have a hydrogeology department that really works hard with the regulatory agencies. And as Dan said, we're often very reactive to what's in the ground. And it's often hard to find those responsible parties. So we have taken an active role in that. But kind of like, as you mentioned with MTB, it had a good, it's good for air quality, but it's not so good for water quality. And so I think that long term, I think that really has to be a really look at all of the different products as they're produced, that safer product look, so that people aren't really using, chemicals that down the road can cause us problems. And I think a lot of times in the manufacturing stream, that's going to be really where it's at to really think about these things before they're used. Once again, PFAS is great for keeping your pizza box from leaking through, but not so good for your water. So I think that's where we really need to go, is to look at kind of on the manufacturing side. Because once again, we're not producing it in California. It's used in some of our industries, but it's not as prevalent. I think a lot of it's just coming in from, kind of the general, what's in products over the years. And I know it's been eliminated now, but we'll see what happens. So,
Jason, how about your experience in Orange County?
Yeah, I would agree with Rob and say that, on the regulatory side, I become more familiar with the Toxic Substances Control Act at the federal level, or TSCA, just because that's kind of the existing procedure as these kind of chemicals are kind of vetted through by industry and through EPA, and working through our associations back in DC. Just, I think, paying more attention to things that go through that process and show up in the Federal Register, just sort of a heightened awareness under the existing regulatory structure, but then also understanding that it's likely arguably not effective enough in catching these kind of contaminants before they are widely released into commerce and the environment. So that's certainly something we're paying more attention to. Kind of on the more immediately practical side, related to our treatment systems, as Steve Tedesco mentioned, we're trying to incorporate flexibility into the designs of our treatment systems. Things like specifying treatment vessels that can accommodate different types of absorptive media, so that we have the option of switching to better, more efficient products in the future, or those that are able to address additional contaminants through the existing systems we put in, as well as what Steve said, setting aside space when we can for the future if it should become necessary.
So I'm going to jump to a couple of questions that folks are asking, just because they seem to kind of match with sort of where we are in this conversation. So I apologize for sort of stepping out, but to Jason, to your last statement, one of the questions I have here is that the technologies listed tend to focus on mass transfer. And so the question is then, how do we make sure PFAS after that initial treatment or whatever treatment we initiate, that those residuals don't re-enter the environment? What are we sort of doing with this stuff after the fact? I mean, can you get it out of the environment completely, or are we just then going to have another issue after we've done the treatment? Obviously, prevention works really, you want to prevent as much as you can, but what do we do with the residuals?
I can take that on, Charlie, at least give some initial thoughts. So, with our current technology, they are all transfer. So what we're dealing with is either reactivation of the granular activated carbon. So that would be sent back for really, really high temperature process. Now, I guess the concern right now from the EPA and a lot of scientists are that the process may not be completely efficient in terms of destroying the PFAS. So again, we may be a bit ahead of ourselves in terms of understanding the fate and transport in the high temperature processes. So if you take that off the table, then you're really talking about landfilling either through conventional means or through a secure hazardous waste landfill. That's really what we have, in where we're at in the state of the industry and the state of the science right now. I guess what I'd add is that there's a lot of work being done on destructive technologies, applying true destructive technologies. So instead of transferring it from one media to another and then, either disposing it or destroying it as a secondary means, looking at, in place in water destruction technologies. Those are still very much in development mode right now. Nothing really at drinking water scale or even close to that. Yeah, there's definitely some growth opportunity within that area of the business.
Okay, because I can see where you treat one problem, we move it someplace else. So we're talking then just sort of handing the baton to somebody else for a new set of regulations because we've just moved it. So it is. I guess I want to bring back in Steve and Craig. Then again, I asked the question of the groundwater guys, but again, back to you guys as retailers. Your perspective on the same topic before I leave it, just on strategies to reduce the impact of groundwater contamination. Is it pretty much just basic treatment, or is there something else that you guys are taking a look at in pilots?
Yeah, from our standpoint, our design team, we just started working on our dual media vessels. We're going to take a look at our GAC and ionic exchange methods to address both our short and long change PFAS. We feel very confident that moving forward, these are the right technologies for now. Also keeping an eye on what Orange County is doing on the novel adsorbents as well to see how successful that's going to be. But for the moment, that's the process that we're moving forward. We are moving forward on pre-purchasing our vessels as well, because there is a back order. And so hopefully we'll be able to come online with our treatment facilities, hopefully by the end of the year.
Yeah. Greg, how about you guys?
Well, I have a 4-hour answer to that, but I'll try and trim it down to 5 minutes.
And only 65 slides that you'd like to share?
Yeah, where are my slides? Someone put my slides up quick. Let me give you. We have kind of two different perspectives at Western. So we have the drinking water side, but we're also a wastewater agency, so we have the wastewater side too. So on the drinking water side, I guess, what is this fortunate or not fortunate? We've got groundwater basins that have other issues, and so we invested in a Chino Basin desalter, which is reverse osmosis technology. We had already invested in an Arlington desalter, which is reverse osmosis to handle salts and nitrates. Well, that technology takes out PFAS too. So, that pre-investment really is working out for us now nicely. We had no idea, of course. No one thought anything, no one knew about PFAS back when we built those facilities. So we don't have to invest in treatment on the groundwater side. But let me give you a little bit of a story on the wastewater side. And this is, we're a little bit ahead of the game. There's not regulations on effluent from the wastewater plant, but we know it's going to come. But we also want to reuse that flow and turn it into drinking water. So we are absolutely going to abide by drinking water regulations. But if we look at a unique part of our service area, we took over a certain air base from the military and became the water and wastewater provider for that base. We inherited 100-year-old infrastructure. And we also inherited rising groundwater at the base. So, they've been fighting fires out there. You all have heard about, airports and military bases. They didn't know they had PFAS in their firefighting foams. They're just using them like they are directed. So, they're just putting out fires when they need to. And lo and behold, you have a contamination plume. Now, what do you do with that? If you have 100-year-old sewer infrastructure, your pipes are very leaky and you have high groundwater. So you're getting a huge amount of infiltration from groundwater into the sewage system. So our treatment plant is, very high levels of PFAS. We're not a live stream discharger. So 100% of the effluent from that plant goes into recycled water use, turf and landscape irrigation. But our long-term plan is to turn that into a groundwater replenishment source. So now what do we do? So you've got a base with a problem, you've got a sewer system with a problem, you have a wastewater treatment plant that you didn't even know had a problem, but our planners want to use it. So we lie in this kind of no man's land of regulation and solutions. But as we work our way through that process, you can either attack it in two ways. You can try and clean up the groundwater basin, or you can clean up the effluent. And so from an engineering standpoint, cleaning up the basin is a huge effort. It's hundreds of millions of dollars, right? Extraction wells all over the place, a treatment system, distribution to get from the extraction wells to the treatment system. Well, in a way, we have a distribution system that brings it to a treatment plant that's called the sewer lines. So, our plan is, rather than trying to remediate the entire basin, because the basin's kind of confined, it's not really leaving the immediate area. We're going to treat the effluent from the treatment plant. We're going to go in and line the sewage, the leaky pipes, and replace the leaky pipes. We're going to then clean the sewer lines, which sounds odd, but you have to get the PFAS out of the sewer pipes. And at parts per trillion, you can imagine in every joint, every crack, every crevice, there's going to be PFAS that are residing there, which are going to continue to leach into your system and are going to continue to show up in your sampling results. And then we're going to put activated carbon on the treatment plant, because obviously the plant wasn't constructed, many decades ago, to treat for PFAS. But the difference in price is significant. So our estimation is, around a $6 million project. to take care of the problem. And we are working with the military, and they have a funding source. So it's just a matter of getting all of our people together and working on it. To do it the other way and remediate the entire basin is hundreds of millions of dollars. So, you know, we can, I think, kind of surgically strike the PFAS problem and make sure that it doesn't become a drinking water source and protect the public in that way. And I think that that's the way a lot of the problem is going to be handled for groundwater basins, because I don't know how at parts per trillion you can ever exhaust it. I'll leave it to the scientists on the panel. I'm just an engineer. But you know, at those kinds of levels, if you've got laboratory equipment that could sniff it out at parts per trillion or even lower, I don't know how it's not sniffed out by laboratory equipment forever.
Well, you make a great point, Craig, because in Southern California in particular, we, as you mentioned, you know, we are bringing water in from up to 400 or 500 miles away. And so there's a huge emphasis locally on how we best manage groundwater basins, how we maximize the use of reclaimed, recycled water. The same is true, and this organization spends a lot of time talking about stormwater related, opportunities and how we really use that resource. But what you just described, this PFAS can really come from every angle, and you got to be very specific as to how you address it, keeping out of the system to begin with.
Yeah, it's really keeping it out of the system. And, getting back, Charlie, to the survey, whose responsibility is this? It was a nice trick question, very crafty trick question. It's everyone's responsibility. I look at it as a retailer. It is our responsibility to keep it out of the distribution system to our customers. We make that commitment to our customers. The trust of our customers is built upon the fact that we're going to take responsibility for that. And so we're going to do that. And, from the regulatory side, I'd like to actually address this. I'll ask the panel a question later about this dilemma between regulatory and practicality, but we make that commitment. Now, I think for our customers, then our obligation is to try and go back and find a funding source to help recover those costs that we have to front to protect our customers. And I've been through numerous litigation activities with polluters, and it's decades to get any sort of funding back. But I think the first line of defense is we protect our customers, and we have to find the funding, whether it's grants or whether we're borrowing, we're bonding these things. But it's our job to protect the customers, and we have to stick together as an industry and reassure our customers that we are doing that.
So before I leave this, I wanted then to ask both Jason and Robert, because of this issue about the heavy emphasis on reclaiming water, you guys are responsible for replenishing the groundwater basins that you're responsible for. Is there, or have you seen yet, any kind of enhanced concentration of PFAS as you go through and use these different processes before you finally deliver the water to your retail customers?
Charlie, we don't have retail customers, so we're once again assisting
to your pumpers.
Yeah, so we're assisting in the cleanup so that we can provide funding and such for them. And I think Craig has it correctly. If you look at the program or the process overall, you're gonna want to do this at that level where it's at the GAC, at the pump, probably. And I know there's space limitations oftentimes, but when you really look at the economics of it, based on what it costs us or pumpers to extract water compared to the imported water costs, there is quite a bit of treatment that can be put on, and it's still very cost effective. It does have an economic impact though, and that's what we're really trying to help out with, was the economic impact, at least of the capital side. So once you put those systems in place, we know that there's long-term O&M and maintenance on that, but we're trying to assist on that capital side. But the economics still play out that it's a resource that we wouldn't want to lose. Groundwater is such a valuable. It's about half the water in our area Once again, it's a very large area, and about half the water is from groundwater. So it's a resource that we need to not only try to protect, but we do need to clean up and assist our pumpers in using that water. We don't want them to stop. And also for the state and every place else. I mean, taking more imported water has, environmental consequences on the Bay Delta and the Colorado River and everything else. So we're really trying to, our board's goal and vision is to get all of our purveyors in the area using 100% groundwater and supplying all that with recycled water. We call it our Win for All program now. And we really are trying to get everybody to utilize groundwater as much as possible. So we want to provide all the assistance we can to get them to do that. And this is one of the things we need to address. As Craig says, it's something we're going to have to address it and just deal with it and fund it. So.
Thanks, Robert. Jason, any different experience at Orange County?
I would just mention, and I think, Charlie, we're going to get in this a little more later, but just, Craig mentioned reverse osmosis as a popular technology used for desalters inland. It's also sort of the core of the state mandated technology for full advanced treatment of recycled water, for potable reuse. And, at least in Southern California, all utilities, pretty much who use that project are dependent ultimately on ocean disposal for that concentrated stream. Once we've stripped out as much of the clean, purified water as we can to recycle and recover from those kind of projects, that waste stream is currently, disposed of through ocean disposal. And so I think that's something I think we probably all need to be thinking about long term, the continued viability of that, because a lot of very fundamental projects in Southern California are really predicated on that model.
Okay, well, I want to use this as that jumping off point because we got our third survey question because you've all alluded to it. It's one thing to recognize there's an issue. It's one thing to talk about some of the technologies that help remove it and what that's like. But at the end of the day, it comes down to cost. So we have our third audience survey. So if somebody else will put that up, the question is, do you think PFAS will have an impact on water rates? No, little or no impact. B, probably, but the impact will be minor. Or 3, yes, I am concerned, and I'm concerned that rates are going to go up significantly. So, again, with all the other pressures operating a water utility and trying to provide a reliable source at an affordable price, well, this one doesn't have the same jumping around. This one's pretty easy to guess. There we go. So we've got 63% believe that rates to be able to pay for this are going to go up, and they're going to go up significantly. So what I'd like to do then, I'm going to come back to you, Craig and Jason. You see how the audience thinks that it'll impact rates, but in reality, PFAS is just one of those issues that cities and municipalities have to fund. You also have to fund replacement of aging infrastructure, spend money on complying with other regulations. You have to make investments in a myriad of areas. How do you communicate the cost and complexities of PFAS removal to your customers and your various stakeholders? And have you been able to explore funding concepts or creative ideas to reduce the impact on customers' rates? I'm going to start, Craig, with you.
Good, because Jason will probably have a better answer than me, so he should go second. Charlie, it's shocking to me sometimes. I'm glad to see the survey results that, and I would expect that to have as many people as are logging into this. They're logging in because they're fairly sophisticated water providers or involved in the water industry, and they know that there is no pot of gold. It takes investment. And we're all nonprofits. It's not like we've got some magic money somewhere. It has to come from the ratepayers. And you hit on it. Those are, it's the dilemma of the retailers. We have to replace infrastructure. We have to treat. We have to monitor. We have to do our water quality analysis. It's all there. The interesting thing is communicating that to the customers, because we do a lot of community outreach. You know, I stand there at night at a community meeting and listen to people tell me that water's free. You know, you guys are criminals. And it always shocks me that, you know, you're like, we're all adults, right? We know that there's a cost to everything. And if you're a good economist, you know, you would follow the dollars all the way back to the manufacturers of PFAS, and you know, you'd be like, these guys have made a fortune off of PFAS, and they took the money and ran, and we're left holding the bag. So, you know, and customers have been the beneficiaries of utilizing PFAS. And now all of a sudden, everyone's upset that they're, you know, that day of reckoning is coming, and, you know, we have to treat for it. But, you know, I think we do a really good job tooting our own horn in the industry of watching costs and being very prudent with our ratepayers' money and good stewards of our ratepayers' money. But without a doubt, it is a very difficult balancing act, because this is expensive. And, you know, there's, as Dan mentioned, there's no light at the end of the tunnel. We're gonna, you know, deal with PFAS, and in 5 years, it's going to be the next emerging constituent, and we're going to deal with that. And, you know, really the drive is that, you know, we're likely going to be putting treatment that can handle all these emerging constituents on all of our water supplies at some point. And I think for areas that maybe are a little more affluent, that's an acceptable answer. But there's a lot of disadvantaged areas that's going to be really hard. And how do they cover the cost of that sophisticated treatment and those increased operating expenses? You know, I think that's the real dilemma that we have to overcome as an industry in the next couple of decades. But it's just going to take investment. I don't see any way around it, because, you know, we're not going to be able to shortcut on the quality of water that we serve to customers.
Jason, how about your experience, and how are you guys looking at mitigating, to the extent you can, the rates that you have to charge to your, you know, your pumpers? But are there other creative areas that you've taken a look at to try to find ways to offset costs?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think first on the communication side of really, you know, having honest conversations about these financial impacts to our primary stakeholders, who are the retail agencies, you know, the pumpers in our basin. You know, I think those have fortunately been, while difficult, have ultimately been effective. I think that, you know, we're fortunate that we've had a sort of a strong foundational relationship with our main stakeholders, kind of through our long time role overseeing the basin. And so I think, you know, our institutional credibility and prior effectiveness in a lot of ways has been invaluable. You know, kind of like Rob mentioned earlier, and I said, you know, not all of our pumpers are affected by this, yet they've been willing to sort of broadly spread the rate impacts across all of them, sort of an all for one for all mentality. And so that's been, you know, that's been really helpful. And we've laid some groundwork before to facilitate that. You know, as I mentioned earlier, talking to the public has been illuminating for this, you know, not only on folks' questions on health effects, but again, that cost side of things, and to kind of, you know, help offset that, you know, as opposed to just raising our rates. You know, we are looking for outside funding sources. You know, we're in the process of developing an application to the EPA WIFIA program now. We've gotten, you know, they've been responsive and are going to take our application for that. We made inquiries with the state to see if the, you know, either the clean water or drinking water SRF programs can be adapted to this situation. It seems like sort of their default settings aren't super amenable to the responsiveness and some of the timing we like to do, but you know, those conversations continue with the state to see if there's a role for that funding source, which I know many utilities have used over the years for projects successfully. But I think ultimately at the end of the day, we don't believe that our ratepayers or the taxpayers really should ultimately be on the hook for all this. And so we, you know, the district is pursuing legal action against the original manufacturers of PFAS to recover these type of costs we're all facing.
And all of those folks are standing in line saying, yeah, let me help out.
Varying degrees.
Okay. Yeah, we sort of have to make just at a certain point because everybody sort of looks the other way. It's like, hey, we knew what we knew when we knew it, and so okay, here's where we are. And as we started the conversation, we now understand something different than when these things were first created. So how do we deal with it, and how do we move forward? So, and as you described though as well, communicating with the public is not kind of like treatment. It's not free. You have to have people that know what they're doing. You have to be able to take the time, the energy, and the staff to go out and to do that. I guess before I leave this piece and move on to Steve and Rob, how has your audience, how have your customers, those you have interacted with, what's been their response? Is it, hey, we understand, hey, we're with you, or do they kind of get into the, hey, we don't really care, just make it go away and make it free?
Are you asking us?
Yeah, both of you, yeah.
Okay, what Jason alluded to this before. And it's a really, really good point. When I go back to DC and look for funding to help offset the costs and talk about regulatory standards, this is right up Dan's alley, and probably he could probably talk for 4 hours on this without a challenge. But one thing that we hear the same thing that Jason's heard is, what is the need to treat? How dangerous is this? And this is, getting the epidemiological world and health effects, to set a regulatory level at 10 parts per trillion. What does that mean? Is that significant to me as an individual? Is there a health risk to me? And if you're going to treat, from 70 parts per trillion down to 10 parts per trillion or 5 parts per trillion, there can be an enormous cost. And do I really need to be there or not? And I think that's one of the huge challenges that we have in the water industry on the regulatory side is Dan has pressure to set a regulatory level, but it takes so long for the health industry to determine what the health effects are. And those are long-term studies, yet there's an immediate need because of publicity, media and everything else, and movies, and this hysteria about you got to treat. I remember, sorry, just to take a 1-minute diversion, 2 decades ago they did a certain entity released a story. They did a study on the Santa Ana River, and they found these horrible things in the water. One of them was acetaminophen. You're getting acetaminophen from the Santa Ana River, and you don't even know it. And so everyone was worried about it. What are we going to do? So we did a study and said, okay, well, what equivalent amount of acetaminophen are you getting with the flow in the Santa Ana River? They did a study, and they said, well, if everyone drank, and I have the numbers slightly off. Jason probably memorized these. If everyone drank a liter of water directly from the Santa Ana River for 70 years, what's the equivalent dosage of acetaminophen, and do we need to be worried? Well, it came out to be, 10 tablets over 70 years. And so, I look at it, I'm like, well, I hurt my back the other day, and I was taking 10 or 20 every week. So, the public kind of found out, and it was like, that doesn't seem like a huge risk to me. So why are we treating for that? I'm not saying PFAS is good for you, obviously, but it's that dilemma of how do you justify the treatment and how do you justify those costs if we're not sure where that trigger level is for risk to the customers. And salt's another good example of that. No salt in your water isn't good. Too much salt in your water is bad. There's a sweet spot of what's allowable and what the human body can tolerate. And so, we got to have the health effects studies that support the regulatory side of it and the cost side of it.
So let me bring Steve and Rob, let me bring you guys back into the conversation because as we talk about cost impacts and PFAS particularly to disadvantaged communities, I think as Craig and Jason sort of alluded, it's one thing if you've got, agencies and communities where, it's a concern, cost is always a concern in meeting health requirements, but California's got an awful lot of communities that we struggle with in terms of providing affordability. What is your experience with some of those disadvantaged communities, and have you guys found creative ways to help offset the need for rate increases?
Well, that's definitely been our biggest challenge, and to compound that, we have the effects of the pandemic. For example, in our city, the cost for our facilities will be between $13 to $15 million, which doesn't include the annual operating expense of about $350,000 a year. We feel it's very unfair for our ratepayers to take this into account. So we are trying to look at alternative funding sources to account for that. We're thankful that the WRD has this particular program, and we're hopeful that we'll be a benefactor of that as well. We're also looking at the state and the federal levels on how we can get some additional funding so that we don't have to pass it along to our customers. I also like to say another creative approach that we're looking at is how we can share this cost with our regional partners, right? So we just started conversations with some of our neighboring cities of maybe doing something that could help all of our cities together more on a regional basis. And so those are initial conversations, but we look forward to having creative solutions so we don't have to go back to our ratepayers to account for things that they shouldn't be responsible for. So that concludes what I had to say on those particular issues.
Thanks, Steve. So Rob, how about you guys? How are you addressing, because your service territory, at least those that are pumpers within your area, could be clearly described in some of those communities as challenged, and I know some folks that pricing is always a critical issue, along with, hey, making sure you've got clean water, because that's obviously a human necessity. What kind of creativity have you guys been able to go through?
Well, yeah, certainly, Charlie. We've been at this business to help our disadvantaged communities for a long, long time. We actually, I think, started our safe drinking water program back in 1991. As has been said today, this is the latest concern, but there have been concerns over the years, and certainly a lot of those areas, there's been a lot of industry and there's a lot of manufacturing that goes on in those areas that have had caused groundwater issues for many years. So we've been providing assistance through our safe drinking water program prior to PFAS, and that program will provide money and or, like I say, technical assistance. One of the things about a lot of those communities is they really don't have the technical expertise even at their water companies. Some of them are just small little mutual water companies, and they really don't have the technical expertise. So we'll actually do a turnkey system for them to help them put in treatment and to use that treatment, because we certainly do want them to continue to use groundwater. And we've been doing that for many, many years. So this PFAS program we have it's kind of an offshoot of that, but it's really just a continuation of our safe drinking water program. Our board has supported that for many, many years. And we've gone beyond just replenishing water. We've always looked at those communities. As everybody's talked about, we're going to continue to look for funding. Really, one of the things the state's good at is they do have several DAC programs, but oftentimes our area doesn't qualify for it because our population is fairly large. So some of those DAC programs really target, smaller communities. And so that's something that we're going to be looking at in the next year or so, just to really say, hey, we have areas, and even though we have a larger population, they are disadvantaged communities and they do need financial assistance. So we're going to continue to look for funding. We're going to continue to provide funding, and we're going to continue to provide technical assistance for our communities. And really, we do share the cost concerns for everybody. And we really want to do this, to provide that assistance, because we recognize that, especially during COVID, they're in a much more difficult situation than several other agencies.
So Dan, everything kind of circles back to you eventually. If there's an issue, what should we do? Oh, wait a minute, I'm not sure I need to do that. But at the end of the day, so a lot of folks come to the state, say, if you're going to set the regulation, you guys are going to help me pay for it. And I know the state in particular has been looked at on this issue of disadvantaged communities. is there any experience or anything that, the thought process that you've been going through and how you might be able to assist some of these communities based upon need and creative funding sources?
Yeah, and that's definitely, the discussions are occurring internally with our Division of Financial Assistance. Without an MCL, it proves to be a bit challenging. However, we're moving that direction, and of course, with SB 200, the passage of that bill and our effort under the SAFER program, we're hoping to provide some focus on PFAS with those systems. That'll be an added vulnerability. So those discussions are definitely occurring. I might also add, and this is a bit of a tangent, we're using other technologies to understand the impact of the state. We're dabbling in machine learning to try to understand if there's a type of community or a type of presence that occurs and what type of PFAS show up. We're working with USGS and some partners in EPA to understand what types of PFAS are associated with certain manufacturing and the health levels. We got to understand more about the health levels. And so with all of that, the discussions are occurring. We definitely need to focus on disadvantaged communities. There needs to be a solution for that regardless. It's going to be a challenging problem, but hopefully with some of the tools we're going to learn and what we're finding through our investigation, we can better focus our resources.
All right, well, I'm going to bring Steve Tedesco back in, and I know I sort of asked you this question a little bit out of sequence when I asked you about, all those wonderful things that scientists and engineers and contractors can do, because, as Craig Miller indicated, give an engineer a problem, he'll find you a solution. But now we're back to that, okay, how do we actually afford these things? In the technologies and the development of those technologies, are there new and better technologies you think on the horizon that will help reduce these costs? Or how do you guys look at, as engineers, how do you look at really pushing the envelope with water purveyors and finding sort of that one-stop solution as opposed to multiple treatment points? Does that make any sense?
Sure. Let me see if I could tackle that one for you. As engineers, we typically like proven solutions, things that have worked in the past. Okay, things that have properly pilot tested in there. So you're seeing right now in the industry, two technologies that have been used for many years to remove contaminants that are used mostly here, which are the GAC and the IX technologies in there. I think in the future, as you see different new media in there that'll last longer in there, that'll bring your costs down, because the media itself is a large part of the operating costs in there. So whatever you can do to reduce the cost of the media is a tremendous cost savings. If you can actually reduce the cost of the vessels also with the new technology, that'll also significantly reduce your operating, your capital costs in there. That's one of the largest capital costs. And if you can get a less expensive media in the future, then that'll also drop your costs significantly.
Good, thank you. So Dan, we got lots of questions in my chat box, and most of them just kind of all come back to you. So I actually have try to combine some things into it, almost like an audience, survey at this point for you. I've got kind of a three-part question. Because of the way the state has to look at this, does the state plan to regulate wastewater discharge? We touched on that a little bit earlier, but there's still discharge from wastewater. So is that new regulations that are likely pending? Second, in things like what Orange County is doing with the groundwater recharge program and the recovery, San Diego Pure Water, LA's big next regional recycle project, with those big mega projects, are those going to need to be regulated at a different level? And does the state plan to regulate the traditional purple pipe, the stuff that we're currently sort of reusing water, but not for human consumption? Are those all regulations that are going to have to be looked at, in play, standards that have to be created?
All these decisions are ultimately up to the State Water Board. However, what we're doing right now is investigating all of those aspects. Our sister division, the Division of Water Quality, has orders out to wastewater treatment plants. And so I believe our first quarter of sampling is due now. at this point to understand what does a sewer shed look like? What is the urban influence? I'm very excited to see what kind of commercial versus industrial versus residential loading might be contributed to the wastewater treatment plants. We've got investigations into biosolids. That's going to be a very challenging problem to understand. Well, I think we understand the problem, but to tackle that problem. We're looking at the effluent and the contribution to surface waters from these discharge plants or from these treatment plants. Then we're going to go probably look at surface waters. Right now, we're going to have an order out in the near future for facilities, or I should say source wells, adjacent to military facilities that use PFAS. So we've got about 300 wells that will be tested here very soon that will add to our roughly 1,000 wells that we're using to learn from. So from all these different perspectives, it's not just drinking water. There's numerous pathways, and I'm just going to go on a tangent here real quick. Monthly, we meet. The State Water Board meets with the other Cal EPA agencies, the Air Board, DTSC, DPR, Cal Recycle, among others, OEHA, to discuss actions that we're taking as a group so that we can be focused to try to tackle this thing in a multi-pronged approach. And so right now, the State Water Board's an investigation. We're learning a lot. I would say every day, based on the results that we're coming back, we're seeing what short chains are prevalent, which aren't, with the efforts of our panels here on this panel, what technologies are available to treat and the feasibility and cost. That's a very important factor. We're in learning mode. And so all of these will inform on how we move forward with regulating discharges, basin plans, et cetera.
Okay, so Scott and Steve, I'm going to pull you guys back in because both of you work for large companies, and having the benefit of working for large companies, you've helped a variety of organizations across the country to identify and manage PFAS. So Steve, I know Tetra specifically has assisted a variety of federal agencies in identifying and remediating PFAS at places like military facilities and other government facilities. What observations or lessons learned can we take away from the investments made by the federal government? Is it something we can implement here at the state and at local levels?
Yeah, so in the federal government right now, especially on the military bases, we're seeing lots of sampling and lots of identification work being done. A lot of groundwater modeling is done, and then pilot testing, bench scale testing, lots of studies that are done by the federal. They're all available for people to use. You get online and look at them. It's got a lot of great information on there. What we're not really seeing right now is a lot of design and construction. There doesn't seem to be a lot of available funding, even in the military bases, to do that type of work in there. So we're seeing some in the past, but not anywhere compared to what we're seeing in the sampling and the identification area. One interesting thing that we have, however, seen is that a lot of military bases have huge plumes of PFAS on the base itself, and it's actually spreading into the other outside communities in there. In order to slow or to stop the spread of the plume, the amount of water that they have to remove from the ground and treat and use is much more than the actual military base can actually use itself. So they really need a partner close by, like a water district or a city, to actually use that water after it's treated. So I think in the future, you're going to see a lot of kind of joint projects between a local military base and a water agency or city water department that's close by.
So Scott, I'm going to move over to you. I mean, Jacobs, you too have assisted a number of organizations with PFAS. How are agencies that are responsible for waste streams like wastewater agencies, landfill operators? What's your experience? What are you seeing them and how are they managing this issue?
Yeah, that's a good question, Charlie. I mean, Dan touched on it a little bit in terms of, looking at things in a strategic fashion outside of drinking water. I guess let me make two comments, one to follow on Steve's. The other area where the military is, really investing is through their CERTIP and ESTCP grant proposals. So a lot of technologies that we're talking about that, can be potentially implemented on the utility side, that's really the impetus that the government's really putting a lot of money into the development and in research of those technologies. So, that's another crossover, I guess, in terms of what we're seeing from the federal space. But I guess from the big picture perspective, related to the military, there's figures out there that when you look at historical PFAS manufacturing, about 3% of it was used for AFFF, and the other 97% is used for consumer products and everything that we've either used historically in the past or are currently using today. So it does kind of put it in perspective that we see both studies on impacted and non-impacted wastewaters, meaning impacted by landfills, where we know that these materials have been disposed of, or impacted by industries, either primary or secondary manufacturing industries. You take those point source inputs out of wastewater, we still see a reasonable amount of PFAS in wastewater. And, we continue to use cosmetics and skin lotions and things that have PFAS, in our products every day. So, although some of this may be legacy in the groundwater, it's also a very much a recurring issue in terms of just us as consumers. I know that I always have a choice of, whether I want really clean water or whether I want my feet wet when I'm, mountain biking. And, that's the choice that we're all in as consumers. It's so prevalent in our society. But I guess I digressed a bit. What Dan mentioned about a strategic fashion within California, I think is very important. Obviously, California started with focusing on sampling of drinking water, but have very systematically looked at groundwater impacts from landfills. They're starting to look at wastewater plants, biosolids, industries that are potentially generating. And I think that this is an important step. I mean, one good example within the US that you can also point to at a state level is Michigan has done a very similar thing, and their state levels have resulted in reduction of many of their point sources going into wastewater treatment plants. So yes, the problem is in our groundwater right now. And, the clear short solution is to be treating drinking water, but we want to be sustainable for the next, 100+ years. And that means that eliminating it if we can't eliminate it from our use as a society, which we might be getting into in a discussion in the future. But, at least eliminating it from our water cycle is something that we should all be focused on as utilities. And so, we see management of wastewater and leachate with respect to PFAS still in investigation mode, and that includes the biosolids. So I can't say there's, any real examples that you can point to where people are actively treating wastewater, but we know that it's on the horizon, and a lot of studies are being done both at the academic level through Water Research Foundation, through different state activities. So that's I think where the wastewater in the landfill point source utilities are probably where drinking water was 2 or 3 years ago. Trying to assess the problem and figure out the best way to attack it.
So very good. See, I'm just sort of looking through our Q&A section here, and I know we've touched on most everything, although there are some folks that have some really very specific questions about treatment options and certain impacts that I know we're probably not going to have a chance to get into at any great level of detail. But given sort of where we are in the conversation, and this is a question for all of you on the panel, is there anything that you think we need to sort of enhance with the conversation? Anything, observations from today's conversation you think you need to make sure we get out onto the table for the folks that are with us? Because I know we'll have an opportunity for those that are online. We'll be following up this program. It's being recorded. We will be posting it to our website, so folks will have a chance to see it again and repurpose it or use it as you see fit. But at the same time, if there are some questions, and we'll take a look and circulate the technical questions back to our panelists, and get some responses, and we'll put that out as part of our communication. So for those that are asking those really technical questions, I want you to know that we're taking those in and we will get you answers to all of it. We may not be able to ask today, but for panelists, anything we sort of left on the table or something that we're sort of missing in the conversation you'd like to add?
Charlie, maybe I always struggle with this myself, and so I'll throw it out to the panel, but it's building on Scott's comments about level of significance of PFAS and keeping things in perspective. It's really difficult. And, you know, even when we go and talk about this to not just the public, but our federal legislators and our state legislators, and I see a question on here, I was kind of scrolling through the questions, and there's one about bioaccumulation and fish. And hey, if we're discharging our RO side stream out to the ocean, what those poor fish, you know, it's gonna bioaccumulate in the fish. And you know, you're thinking, well, the ocean's an enormous place, and what would the concentration be for the fish? You know, so you think about the significance of that, and you know, I think, well, it'll be very dilute. You know, I don't know that you're going to find PFAS in fish, but I don't know the data. But if you read the literature and you follow the data of other things, you know, the carpet in your house might be at 10 times the level in drinking water, and the level in your own body is an order of magnitude higher than drinking water. Notification levels and action levels. So, you know, how do we wrestle as a society with regulating water down to, you know, 5 parts per trillion and trying to determine the health effects when in your own body it might be an order of magnitude higher than that, or the carpet that you're laying on in your home might be in 1,000 parts per trillion or something like that. So it's a really difficult question, but I think we all have to keep this in perspective and understand that, you know, drinking water is important, but it's all over the environment, and you're getting vastly higher doses from other things than what you're going to get from a fish that is harvested from, you know, the middle of the ocean, nowhere near discharge of PFAS from a wastewater treatment system. So I don't know what the answer is to that, but I think we have to keep it in perspective. I know the regulators struggle with that, and the health experts struggle with that. So, you know, much more to come on that. As a water entity, we do what we can for our part of the problem, but societally, there's a bigger issue that has to be addressed.
Good. Any others that want to chime in? Anything we may have left on the table?
I guess I just make one comment that, you know, and this may not necessarily apply to Southern California because of the activity going on, but, you know, we've talked a lot about states with regulations or guidance values, and there's been 2 examples that I've been directly involved with utilities that have looked at their utility footprint as a one water footprint between the wastewater and landfills that they own and you know, in drinking water, and they're both in states without current state regulations. So, you know, there is a level of proactivity for both of these counties to do basically a desktop vulnerability risk assessment, to take GIS data of, you know, where the airports and the manufacturing facilities could be, you know, where they are in relation to the, you know, to the drinking water wells, you know, what the potential sources to their drinking water could be, and, you know, what truly is the risk. You know, do they have an immediate risk? Do they have a long-term risk? Can they mitigate the risk and cut off the risk? So it's I guess just a thought out there for anyone who's listening that may not be in, you know, direct heat of the fire, so to speak, in terms of needing treatment, but they're at the beginning phases of investigation. We've seen value in proactive, you know, utilities in counties doing those types of activities at a desktop level.
Okay, very good. All right, so as we're getting ready to sort of close, I would want to make sure that we have one final question. And for those of you, and thank you again for those that are online and joining us, that the Southern California Water Coalition really is predominantly an education-based organization. We do very limited advocacy, but mostly our facilitation is to help raise issues, bring education to the table, and then as we're doing today, stimulating. So what are the possibilities and how do we work together between industry, between water purveyors and state and federal regulators? So I wanted to just put up one last survey for you just to help us in our mission. And so the question is, how can the Southern California Water Coalition help local leaders address and advance the PFAS topics that we have discussed today? And I'd really appreciate sort of your take on this and creating opportunities for knowledge and sharing, like we've done today, develop and share informational materials such as videos, fact sheets about PFAS to the general public, advocate for appropriate regulatory policies with folks like Dan at his institution or the State Water Board. And then helping create partnerships or coalitions among the many stakeholders involved. I'm interested as to where an organization, a nonprofit like this, can best help facilitate resolution to vexing issues and sometimes difficult conversations we have to have on things like water quality. So while we're waiting for those results to come in, though, Scott, I'm going to kind of come back to you to help us sort of close out. In your role at Jacobs, and the technology leaders with what strategies and solutions do you think, your advice again to us, we should be paying more attention to and considering, are we considering anything to be a little closer? What kind of conversations are going on with producers, with manufacturers about PFAS? And are we going to really be able to get interested parties to remove and replace PFAS in society? And is that really a noble goal, or are we just sort of whistling in the wind on trying to really eliminate that from society?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, that the answer to that is something I don't know if I'm in a position to answer for us as a society, but I would say I think we've touched on it a lot. It's so pervasive in our society, from cosmetics to Gore-Tex and everything in between, that I think there's been a lot of factors. Certainly our scientific improvements of being able to detect at nanogram per liter levels where 20, 30 years ago a low level value was micrograms per liter. So there's always the aspect that scientists are looking to investigate, and if they're looking for it, they'll find it, and we have to, I think, determine as a regulatory body within the states and within the government, as well as the practicality of treatment, what helping us try to get to the science, not outpacing regulations. We got to get to more of a balance point there. I would say that the manufacturing certainly has transitioned to shorter chains and polyfluorinated compounds. So we have seen the industry react to that, but you also have to take a look at data points such as in the mid 2000s, PFOA and PFOS were banned from all of the basically banned from production from all of the Geneva Convention states that or countries that are part of that. And what ended up really resulting out of that was that China pushed up production of these compounds that the rest of the US and Europe basically banned from production. So what we've been struggling with for probably the last decade or so is imported products that might be used in secondary manufacturing here or directly to the consumer still contain compounds that we banned as a manufacturing society in the Western Hemisphere 15 years ago or so. So it's really good to see that states and the federal EPA have recently announced, many states have taken action. EPA has announced a new program where they're requiring inventory and reports for secondary manufacturers to disclose what they're using for PFAS. So there are steps being taken, not to just worry about it after it's gotten into our environment and into our water source, but there are steps being taken to continue to control and ban things. I think that, as Craig said, it's all about risk versus reward. And, I think there's a lot of consumer pressure to ban things, and we have to rely on that as well. Our manufacturing capabilities and in companies are very much consumer driven, and if our consumers that don't want it in the water also don't want it in their products, I think a lot can be said for that.
Good. Well, thanks for that. So I'm seeing my survey results while you were just finishing up, and I was not a math major. I'm just kind of trying to sort through the numbers here on 59, 50, 51%, 48%. How I make all that work. What I'm taking away from that is, much like you, there's an awful lot of work still for us to do, and things that we need to be able to do as a volunteer organization and as an education organization to sort of help advance this issue. I will share as part of our close, this was the single highest participation and reservation interest that we have had in any of our What Matters series over the course of the last year. So clearly, this is a topic that water quality and PFAS specifically that we have got to be able to address and be able to help all of ourselves, everybody globally, sort of come up with, good answers to good questions, so that, those that ultimately have to make the decision, make informed decisions, and have the input that they need from all of us that are involved. And so for that, I want to be able to say thank you very much today, Robert, Steve Carmona, Jason, Scott, Craig, Dan, and Steve Tedesco. Could not have done this without you. Your expertise is invaluable in getting this on the table and getting a great conversation started. Clearly, I think there's going to be some follow-up that we're going to need to do today. I also want to say thank you to our sponsors, Jacobs, SL Environmental Law Group, Tetra Tech, Aqueous Vets, Black & Veatch, Calgon Carbon, CDM Smith, HDR, Pacific Hydrotech, and Stantec for being able to make this program specifically available. It's very helpful. And to our founding sponsors, as always, we love the work and partnership that you have with us: Irvine Ranch, Metropolitan, Riverside County, WRD, Inland Empire Utility Agency, LADWP, LA County Public Works, San Bernardino County, and West Basin. So for all of you that were on with us today, we thank you. Give us, 72 hours or so. This will be available back to the Southern California Water Coalition website for those who'd like to see it again or repurpose it for your own use. And again, we'll have some follow-up to everyone who registered today with capturing some of those additional questions. So panelists, take a look at your email. We may ask you for some responses that we can put back out to those that were asking those questions. And then we'll be doing a follow-up communication there. And we'll look forward to sometime later in the year as we get closer to some of the regulations, making sure that we get everybody sort of on the record and make sure that we get a chance to contribute to the conversation. And then lastly, you're going to get a survey. Please take a chance to do the survey for us as to what worked, what didn't work. And as always, we love it when you promote the programs and use your social media. It's a tremendous thing that we're trying to get done here. The team here works really hard at putting stuff out, and to the extent that you can help us deliver that messaging, we'll do programs like this in the future and make sure that we bring everybody to the table and create those kind of informational programs and coalitions that make public policy a reality. So with that, I want to say thanks again to everybody that was involved today. We hope you have a great weekend, and we'll see you again when the next of the series of What Matters from the Southern California Water Coalition.